let's get started. So you're sitting in the middle. Oh, Sam, can you sit in the middle? Yeah. All right, thanks everyone. So Sam, this morning you were in Berlin with the Bundeskanzler. So what did you talk about?
Yeah, I'm sorry for being late, but I think it was important and really good. We talked about a lot of things. We talked about how what's happening, what's gonna where we think it's gonna go, what's important for Germany, the sort of whole stack of what it takes to be great at AI, how to get the right balance between all of the upsides that can come here and regulation that keeps us safe in the short and the long term and doesn't overly restrict innovation, and what the role for Germany and Europe was in all of that.
So we have a lot of students here, and the students use ChatGPT and Copilot quite a lot, right? Are you doing that? So for a lot of people starting out to code, they see that all these simple questions that we ask them can be easily answered by ChatGPT. So they might wonder, well, why do we need to code still, or do we still need to code, or learn how to code?
You want to take that?
Sure, yeah. So I'm actually an AI researcher, AI safety researcher at OpenAI. So a big part of my job is coding, and a big part of that coding has actually been kind of taken over by Copilot, which doesn't mean I let it do my work, but as I code, it will give me suggestions, and a lot of them are great. But it definitely doesn't mean I don't need to know how to code. I should stop learning how to code. I think for a long time, tools like Copilot will enable us to do our work with more leverage and scale it up, basically do more in the same amount of time with the same amount of people. And yeah, I think that will continue to be this way, and coding is still quite important to learn.
I have two thoughts on this. One is there's a long history. We get better tools, and we just expect more from ourselves. We just do more. We don't do less. We always do more. And I think if you look all the way back from punch cards to low-level language to high-level languages, the fact that you can program in natural language now, the fact that the computer can help you debug better, it just means people are going to write more and better code, and we will all of us get better quality of life. But I think there's so much latent demand for services like this that we have something that helps us do our tasks, and we just do better jobs. Also, I hope people continue to learn to code and learn to write, even if you can do it better in the tool-assisted way. I think the benefits of these things are very deeply about learning how to think, and it'll be a big mistake if people decide to stop teaching this in schools.
So we have been seeing these systems getting better and better, and on an extremely fast pace. So for example, GPT 3.5 that most people are probably using through ChatGPT gets, for example, some things wrong, but then GPT-4 gets actually most things right? So within a few months of releasing the product, we're already seeing a lot of progress. So the resources used for this progress are pre-training on a lot of data in the internet and predicting the next token and a lot of compute, right? So do you see this scaling trend of things improving to continue the next few years, or do you think we might asymptote soon?
I think there's definitely a scaling trend that will continue for some time. One issue is there's limited amount of data on the internet and on the planet, so for sure at some point we're going to hit some limits of not being able to scale up more. Similarly for compute, we can't just at some point we need too much energy, too many GPUs. There's probably a bunch of low-hanging fruits that we can still pick up on the way. We can also extend to more modalities like use video, use audio. We might be able to think or train longer on difficult problems and spend less time on predicting, for example, advertisements or children's books. But yeah, for sure, at some point we will need some kind of paradigm shift.
That sounds good. I think that's exactly right.
Okay, so Johannes mentioned this aspect of multimodality. So what we're seeing right now is GPT-4 is multimodal, so it can take images as an input. But the multimodal model doesn't perform better than the text-based model. So, but if I, as a human, I can also learn stuff from video, for example, right, and can also get better at text-based tasks. So do you see a future where these models learn from a lot of data sources, like text, audio, video?
I feel confident that's going to work. I think, yeah, I'd be very surprised if that didn't work.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So we've all seen ChatGPT say, my knowledge is cut off in 2021, right? When we ask questions.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's a little embarrassing. We're going to fix that.
You're going to fix that? Okay. So it seems very difficult to fix because the model is so expensive to train. So can you speak to that?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is you can keep training these models forever. You have to figure out how to do it in a way where it really does update. And the other is I think people make a big mistake when they think of these models as a database. If what you're using this for is like I needed to know everything that was in the news every day, that is like it will work, sort of, but it's like the world's most expensive, slowest, least accurate database. What you really want here is what makes this special, why it's worth spending all this money and effort, is that it's a reasoning engine. And we're training it to be a reasoning engine. We're not training it to like memorize all current data. And then we'll figure out some sort of retrieval-like approach to give it the ability to search the internet so that it can know, who won the sports game tonight or what happened yesterday. And I think that'll be a better approach. But we will try to figure out how to train continuously because that's important for other reasons.
So open source models have been getting really good in the past few years, and Germany is actually really active in that. So for example, there's a clip model from OpenAI, there's an open clip model led by a German researcher. Then there is Stable Diffusion, that's actually also by people from the Munich Center of Machine Learning, and the data set is by a German non-profit organization. So what I'm curious is, what do you think is the role of these open source models and then these closed models which are much more powerful, right? Especially GPT-4. You want to go first?
Sure. I think for sure open source models are catching up, and I think that's great. I think there's a lot of impactful work that can be done with open source models. I do think that it's dangerous to just freely release the strongest models that we've ever trained to the world and open source them. I think as those models get stronger, we need to be careful about what harm could they cause in the world, and we need to make sure we very clearly understand those harms and how to mitigate them before just giving everybody access to them. But I think in general, it's great that the smaller models are catching up, and a lot of useful tasks that are clearly not a huge risk to humanity can now be done by these open source models.
Yeah, I think it's awesome that we're seeing such great, vibrant open source work happening, and I think there probably will be some capability threshold where we feel differently about it, but for now, this is really good. I'm curious if we stay on the same GPT 2 to 3 to 4 trajectory for 5 and 6. How many of you would like us to open source GPT 6 the day we finish training it? Wow. Well, we're not going to do that, but that's interesting data.
So do you see the gap of the open source to these big closed models to close somewhat or to open up more?
I think what will happen is the frontier will not be open sourced right away. And that'll give us time to figure out what we need to mitigate, what the safety issues are. But the open source lag will not be that much. And a few years later, once we know kind of what the limits are and how to make it safe, there'll be very good open source models. But my sense is that lag time is probably something we are going to want more and more. We'll be happier and happier to have that over time.
Okay. So a lot of the advances in AI have been coming out of private research labs like OpenAI, a lot of the big advances. So we are at the universities, so why do you think these advances are really coming out of private research labs, not so much out of university, and what can we do better?
I think one big limitation, of course, is compute. It's much harder for a university to get access to this amount of compute for example, training a model of the size of GPT-4, which doesn't mean there's nothing else to be done. Clearly, smaller models are catching up. We now have models that can run on one GPU that are catching up to GPT 3.5 behavior. And I'm sure there's a lot of additional work that can be done to make things more efficient and more accessible also for smaller labs or smaller amounts of compute. I think.
Yeah, I think structures like OpenAI are good at some things. Universities are great at a lot of things. And it's generally reasonably complementary. I think there's a ton of work that's happened in universities they wouldn't have happened at somewhere like OpenAI. I think the things that OpenAI is good at, sort of the culture we have, the way we work, wouldn't quite translate to a university department. But I think that's all really great. Like we all get to benefit.
Yeah, so we benefit from each other to
Yeah.
some extent. Yeah. So to reach capabilities like of a model of like GPT-4, it seems you have to get a lot of things right, like the data, the training, like the engineering and all that. Can you speak a little bit to, yeah, what are you doing right at OpenAI, or what kind of decisions, what structures lead to the ability to build something like that?
I mean, we can like talk about a lot of little things that we try to get right, and we do try to get all the details right. This is, I think, something that OpenAI has a good focus on. You know, it's not usually about the one big breakthrough idea. Sometimes those happen, but it's about doing 200 little things all really well, and everybody looking at the entire, you know, jointly optimizing across the entire stack. So the people that work on the networking for our big cluster are talking to the people doing the ML research and the people collecting the data sets. And that's really important. But we sweat every detail. Everybody looks at trying to sort of optimize this one super hard thing we're doing. So hundreds of people work together, and they're all just trying to like make the GPT-4 model be good. And then the other thing is a culture that is good at repeating innovation. And I think this is one of the harder things to build in any kind of institution, business, at the academy, whatever. But people who are focused on figuring out how we're going to do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, even if it's different each time, and being relatively disciplined in sticking to our convictions. So I think it's very easy to copy. It is very, like, once OpenAI makes GPT-4, a lot of people are going to copy that. But the special thing about OpenAI is we will go figure out the next paradigm. And that's I think, what we're actually good at.
Yeah, I agree. It's a lot of attention to detail, a lot of very hard work to like get every single piece of a huge engineering feat right. We hold each other to pretty high standards and like do a lot of thorough work testing every single piece. And in the end, they basically get multiplied together. So the better every part works, or like making sure that every part works, is really crucial.
Very interesting. So there's a lot of discussion about what AI, or how AI will impact jobs. And I mean, I can say it impacted my job very positively, so I'm using it in all sorts of aspects. So there's a lot of discussion on that. So it seems that there are also risks associated with essentially not adopting AI in some jobs. So what jobs do you see most affected by AI if they do not embrace AI in the next, like, let's say, 2 years?
In 2 years, I think people always overstate the amount of change that's likely to happen. There's like a lot of inertia in the system. But if we look at like 10 years, I would expect a great majority of jobs to be better off if they embrace AI than not. But again, I think this is, it's like a fool's errand to try to predict exactly how this is going to unfold. Like, one thing I would say confidently is that the rate of change in the future is going to be much faster, and people who use AI tools are going to be more productive, more effective than people who don't. But beyond that, the ways it actually rolls out, you know, if you look at the historical predictions about what AI was supposed to impact versus what it's doing right now, if you look back at what all the experts said 5 years ago, they were like horribly wrong. And we can sit up here and be horribly wrong again. It's like sort of, you know, fun to speculate, but I think you just got to embrace the rate of change and embrace the productivity gains from the tools.
So a lot of people watched the congressional hearing last week where we went. It was a super interesting hearing. As a European, it was interesting that everybody agreed that we should regulate AI further. However, in Europe, we have the toughest data regulation laws in the whole world already, and we also see that impacting us negatively. So for example, BART is not even rolled out in all of Europe, yeah. Right? So these regulations tend to have positive impacts, but also negative impacts. So do you think, especially in Europe or Germany, that there's also some risk of kind of over-regulation and stimulating? Yeah.
I think regulation is, I mean, as we've been calling for it, I think regulation is really good. for a technology like this. I generally think it is better to wait and see what's going to happen and then regulate responsively. But there are times, and I think this is one of them, where you do want to be proactive. You still have to get it right. One of the reasons I'm doing this trip around the world, the biggest one is to just listen to people, particularly our developers, but also all the people who are being impacted by this technology, and asking what they'd like us to do, how they want this to work, what they want the limits to be, how we should decide what the values of these systems are going to be, and how we make sure that people can customize it by country, by jurisdiction, by culture, by individual. And just sort of like, it's been quite good to get out of this sort of like Bay Area echo chamber. Been to a lot of other places so far. But another part of this is to talk about the importance of regulation, and we think it's really important. We want to make sure that whatever is passed around the world is like sensible and that we're able to comply with it, but we certainly want to do that.
Yeah. So you just mentioned values. So there are different values, and there's also very different ideas on how people think what is biased, what is not biased, and it seems like something extremely difficult to balance if you just have like one system. Is there going to be a world where there's going to be different systems?
I sort of don't believe that any two people on Earth will ever agree that a system is unbiased. And I think that's good. I think that's fine, at least. I think we do have to define what the outer bounds of a system are going to be. What are the things that it just won't do? And then also, if you're using it in Germany versus using it in the US, there will be different laws and some things that it can do in one place and not another. And then most of all, I think giving users a lot of control within those bounds of what they're going to, how they want the system to behave, what their value system is really important. We've done our first little thing with that with the system message in GPT-4, which I think gives people a taste of how this could work. But I think we're going to have to figure out a new democratic process to define what the bounds of the systems are, what the default is, and then how much we let users customize within that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think ultimately we will need some system where there's some, like you said, some guardrails, some framework around like what will never be allowed. This might be something like not violating the Charter of Human Rights, or something that we can generally agree on as humanity of being bad. And then probably a lot of the rest of the behavior should be decided not by us as a company or not by a few, like a small amount of people, but by some process, some democratic process. Maybe countries come together, maybe there's some like kind of governance around the world, or maybe every country will decide for themselves. Like Germany has different law for freedom of speech than the US, for example, so there might be different behavior around this in different countries. We are trying to make our models both better at following certain guardrails that should never be overwritten, not with jailbreaks, not if you ask nicely, not if you threaten it. And we're also trying to make our models better at being customizable, so without retraining one model for each person on the world, making them listen more to additional instructions of what kind of behavior the user or the developer wants, and trying to strike a balance in like resolving this hierarchy of values and like still having great behavior in the end.
Okay, so I have 1,000 more questions, but I want to give the audience a lot of time to ask them questions. So before that, just one last question. So like we have a lot of students and young people here and people from tech who are like super excited about the opportunities of AI and building careers around it, building businesses around it. Can you speak towards the opportunities that you see for them?
This is the best time in at least 15 years, and honestly probably longer than that, to be starting a career in technology. Like this 2 or 3 year period that's about to happen should just be like a Cambrian explosion of new stuff. I think. I think this is going to be the most useful, impactful, beneficial, amazing tool that humanity has yet created. I think I used to say the computer was that, and then we didn't have anything that surpassed it for a while, and I'm pretty confident this is going to surpass. So everyone is going to do super great. It's just going to be this like incredible up elevator for all of us. But man, if there is a time to like really go build something amazing at the beginning of a new platform shift, this is at least the best moment since the iPhone App Store launched, and probably back longer than that, probably since the internet.
Thank you so much. So now let's hear from the users of OpenAI. So who has a question? So we have 2 people with microphones.